Welcome to Pod Save America. I'm Jon Favreau.
I'm Jon Lovett.
I'm Tommy Vietor.
On today's pod, Tommy talks to CNN polling guru Harry Enton about the 2020 map and the path to flip the Senate in November. Before that, we'll talk about how the coronavirus may now be spreading through the White House, Attorney General Bill Barr's decision to drop charges against one of the president's convicted criminal friends, what Barack Obama thinks about all this, and why Trump has accused Governor Newsom of rigging this week's special congressional election in the California 25th. Just another day in paradise here, guys. You will also hear a sneak preview of Tommy's Pod Save the World interview with Patrick Radden-Keefe, the host of Wind of Change, a brand new podcast from Crooked Media, Pineapple Street Studios, and Spotify, which is finally out today. Tommy, you want to say a few words about one of the best podcasts our fine listeners will ever hear?
So listen, I sincerely think that this is one of the best podcasts I've ever heard, one of the best stories I have ever heard. So Patrick Radden-Keefe is like a heavy hitter New Yorker writer. He's written about El Chapo, terrorism, like all these big pieces. This story is about a power ballad from the 90s called Wind of Change that was the anthem to the fall of communism in the USSR, and a tip that he got a decade ago that it might have been written by the CIA. And so you'll hear more about the show itself in my interview with Patrick. The cut-down version will go on Pod Save America. A longer one will go on Pod Save the World. But my pitch to you guys is if you're looking for 8 episodes of like mystery, spy stories, metal bands, music, fun, just like a total escape from the nightmare that is the COVID reality we are all living in, this is the show. It is so fun. You can binge it all right now for free on Spotify. So check it out there. You don't have to have a paid subscription. You can binge it right now, Monday, for free. Check it out. It's such a fun show. You will love it. I'm so excited that this thing is finally in the world. We've been working on it for a year. So trust me on this one.
I can't improve upon that.
I'll just add, do it for us too. Like, we really want this thing and need it to be a hit. So head on over there.
Do it for yourself. Do it for yourself.
Yeah, do it for us. Patrick, the team at Pineapple Street Studios did just an unbelievable job. This is like a big budget, went to 4 continents, like amazing show. Check it out.
I always test these things on non-political news junkies. Like, Emily loved it. My brother loved it. My sister-in-law loved it. They all started listening to it yesterday. It's really, really, really good.
So fun.
Love it. I believe you also had an excellent show this weekend. Tell us all about it.
Huge. We had a fantastic Love It or Leave It. We talked to Michael Lewis, the author, about the 5th risk and Trump as a bad coach of a good team. Brittany Packnett shared her thoughts about this gruesome murder in Georgia and the public outcry about the lack of charges. Emily Heller joined for a gardening segment against my will, and Whitney Cummings was hilarious judging the monologue. Check it out. It is, I think, one of my favorite episodes with a lot of great conversations and really funny segments.
Excellent. All right, let's get to the news. Last week, Donald Trump said, quote, "We did everything right. Now it's time to get back to work." On Sunday, one employee said, quote, "It is scary to go to work. I think that I'd be a lot safer if I was sitting at home." That employee was White House economic advisor Kevin Hassett, and he was talking about the West Wing, where 2 staff members have now tested positive for COVID-19, one of President Trump's personal valets and Katie Miller, Mike Pence's press secretary. The infections have forced a number of senior White House health officials to self-quarantine to some degree after possible exposure, including FDA Commissioner Stephen Hahn, CDC Director Robert Redfield, and Anthony Fauci. Tommy, I want to get your reaction to Trump's response to the news about Miller. He said, quote, "She's a wonderful young woman, Katie. She tested very good for a long period of time, and then all of a sudden today she tested positive. And this is why testing isn't necessary. We have the best testing in the world, but testing's not necessarily the answer because they were testing them."
Look, I mean, thank God President Trump is willing to tell the hard truth about healthcare in general, which is that one day you can go to the doctor and be healthy, and then later you can get sick. So why bother to go in the first place, right? I mean, it doesn't like this is so ludicrous on its face. He's trying to downplay the need for testing because the federal government has completely failed to ramp up the availability and frequency of testing. And so now he wants to push all that responsibility, all of that work to the states, and then try to say, well, my focus here at the White House is about reopening the economy. But this example perfectly demonstrates why this strategy is doomed to fail, because the president's valet had COVID. So that job means you're in the Oval Office dozens of times a day. You bring the president food, drinks, you hand him his Diet Coke. There's no one really with more direct contact. And the VP's press secretary, Katie Miller, now has coronavirus. She's sitting in all the task force meetings. So now Fauci, the CDC director, the FDA commissioner, they're all self-quarantining. She's also married to professional racist Stephen Miller. So he is susceptible and he has direct access to the president. So first of all, I feel badly for anyone who has to work in the West Wing right now, because it is tiny. And before you all yell at me that these people chose to work for Trump, know that the cleaning crews, the military aides, the press, they did not choose to work for Donald Trump. But my first office in the West Wing was called Lower Press. You guys remember this. It's literally directly behind the briefing room podium when you watch Trump and the coronavirus task force. And I haven't been in there in a while, but back in the day, we used to seat 8 people in a space that would be considered too small for a studio apartment, right? So social distancing is impossible. But, the White House is still...
Me and Rhodes in the basement, our office that was then your office too. No windows, no ventilation, just a tiny cramped office in the basement of the West Wing. It's terrifying.
A petri dish. And look, in the White House, they're blessed with having the fastest, most modern equipment. They're testing every day, and they can't keep the virus out of the building. So how are the rest of us supposed to do so and head out in the world and back to work and stay safe? And so, the initial phase of social distancing and in the bending the curve that we were talking about, that was not an end in and of itself. It was supposed to give us time to ramp up hospital capacity and testing so we could try to keep a lid on this thing in a regional way and regional outbreaks by testing and contact tracing. And we are just nowhere near ready. And you're seeing it with these videos of packed restaurants and TJ Maxx's and everything else. But the White House, despite the fact that the virus is in the heart of the West Wing, they still want to push us to reopen. So I just think it's a very ominous side for how things are going to go.
Lovett, Trump's decided to label this period where he pretends the pandemic is already behind us the transition to greatness. This is what he's been tweeting in all caps. It seems like maybe a COVID outbreak at the White House might complicate that message. What do you think?
Yeah, definitely.
Maybe
COVID
throws a wrench in the.
COVID hasn't really gotten the talking points. COVID has consistently refused to go along with the Trump messaging campaign. There's all this outside of the... I feel like one thing that's happened over the past, say, 48 hours, 72 hours is a combination of two things. One is, as Tommy points out, that the White House, the West Wing specifically, is small, it is cramped. And so you see all these advisors saying, yeah, it's bad, but we're doing it for our country. They're combining two things. The risk that might be necessary in this emergency to serve the country, and the refusal, even inside the White House, for people to take this seriously enough. I mean, we watched for weeks as the coronavirus task force and Trump would hold briefings where nobody was socially distant. We have now seen footage of Trump wandering around places without masks, Pence wandering around places without masks, Pence's team trying to get people to take masks off. You have a concern in Iowa amongst local officials that Mike Pence, far from coming to reassure the country and assuage people's fears, is a fucking vector for disease. So we should really make sure we're separating out and both sort of in how we look at what Trump and these people, these dummies are doing, and Trump's larger policy goals, which is they're trying to elide the difference between a careful reopening in which people take all necessary precautions and it takes place gradually, and just opening the country back up and returning to greatness, whatever that means.
It's also, it is also an example of, so the White House staff is not, and including and starting with Donald Trump and Mike Pence, is not taking their own guidelines seriously, right? There's not enough masks in the White House. They're not social distancing. But in some ways, it's also like test for me, not for you, right? Like what happened with Katie Miller and the valet is almost exactly what should happen in a workplace going forward, right? They test everyone daily, or they test some White House staffers weekly. And then as soon as you find that someone is positive, You then contact trace all of their contacts. You ask those people to quarantine and self-isolate. And that is what the White House has done. That's why all these senior health officials are quarantining right now. And Trump being like, yeah, well, one day you can test positive, and then one day you can test negative, and the next day you can test positive. Like, imagine if there were no tests in the White House, like there aren't in thousands of places, millions of places all across the country, and Katie Miller ends up being asymptomatic, and so does the valet. How many more people would they have infected if they didn't get tested, if people weren't quarantining and isolating? It is proving the entire point of why we need to ramp up testing. We're averaging 250,000 tests per day. Last week, it was like a little over 300,000 some days, so it's getting better. But Harvard University epidemiologists there say that we need 900,000 a day by May 15th. So we're still not at the level we need to be safe. So when outbreaks happen at workplaces, which they may, you'll be able to do exactly what the White House did in this situation.
It's also it's crystal clear that Trump won't wear a mask because he thinks it makes him look stupid. And It is so irresponsible. It is demonstrating bad behavior. But I nearly lost it when I saw Trump doing an event with World War II veterans without a mask on. Like, it is so disrespectful. You call these people there, these heroes from World War II, who are absolutely going to die if they get COVID, and you can't show the respect to wear a fucking mask in front of these guys who are there for D-Day.
Did you hear what Kayleigh McEnany said when asked about this? She said, well, they chose to come. Yeah. The 95-year-old World War II heroes chose to come, so it's on them.
And once again, I think it's time we call out the Harvard Law School admissions process that takes a look at potential transfers. Obviously, we've seen problems at the undergraduate level with people like Jared Kushner, but we should also look at the decision-making that's leading Harvard Law to admit people who transfer to Harvard Law, because it's really doing a damage, I think, to that brand.
Yeah, Kayleigh's having a rough run in her first week as White House press secretary. I bet a lot of people are wondering why they went back to this old system when not having her to not lie was probably even easier.
All right. So you guys might remember that long before Donald Trump let a plague loose on America, a number of his top advisors were convicted of various crimes that were uncovered during the investigation of the Russian operation to help Trump win the presidency. On Thursday, the Department of Justice took unprecedented steps to dismiss the case against Michael Flynn, Donald Trump's first national security advisor, who pled guilty twice to lying to the FBI about conversations he had with the Russian ambassador to the U.S. during the 2016 election. Flynn later withdrew his guilty plea, and Trump was reportedly ready to pardon him until Attorney General Bill Barr dropped the charges in a 20-page memo in which they argued that the FBI had no justification for interviewing Flynn in the first place and that his lies had nothing to do with any relevant FBI investigations. Tommy, why is this such a big deal?
So it's a big deal because Attorney General Bill Barr is taking a series of steps to systematically undercut and undo the Mueller probe for purely political reasons. So remember, going back in time a little bit, that Barr basically applied for the job of Attorney General by writing this unsolicited memo attacking the Mueller investigation. He got the gig. He then wrote a 4-page letter spinning Mueller's report in a wildly dishonest way before the whole thing was released. More recently, Barr's handpicked staffer asked for a more lenient sentencing for Roger Stone, which led to 4 career prosecutors withdrawing from the case and 1 resigning. So that brings us forward to Barr asking another prosecutor to review Flynn's case. So last week, the interim U.S. attorney for the District of Columbia, this guy Timothy Shea, who is Barr's handpicked guy, filed a motion to dismiss the false statement charge against Flynn, which he had pleaded guilty to, as you just said, John, twice. And so it's worth noting that this interim U.S. attorney, Michael Shea, he wasn't vetted. He wasn't confirmed by the Senate. He was appointed. So he's just Barr's guy in there doing his bidding. So this new DOJ argument is just absurd on its face. They say that Flynn's lies to the FBI were immaterial to the underlying case, thus they should throw the thing out. So remember that lie that Flynn told the FBI, the vice president, Sean Spicer, and thus the public, was that he didn't discuss sanctions when he made a phone call during the presidential transition with Sergei Kislyak, the Russian ambassador to the U.S. But he did. And now, arguing that lie is somehow immaterial to a counterintelligence investigation about Russian interference in the 2016 election is just ludicrous, especially when you consider that there was already concern about Flynn himself, specifically that he had been paid $40,000 by RT to deliver a speech, which is the Russian language propaganda network. And he went to this gala in Moscow and he sat next to Putin. I think it was Moscow. So I'm not saying that makes Flynn guilty or a Russian asset or any of the darker charges you hear, but it's nonsensical that you could argue that a phone call so clearly relevant to the underlying context and concern is irrelevant. And, they're also pointing to some procedural issues that maybe the DOJ and FBI made some mistakes with respect to reopening the case or was trying to set him up. So, look, I'm not an expert on any of that. But to play devil's advocate for a second, I am very open to criticisms of Comey or how the case was handled. I'm open to arguments that prosecuting someone under the Logan Act is just dumb, or that FARA, the Foreign Agent Registrations Act, is confusing or inconsistently enforced law at best. But just stepping back, it would have been a dereliction of duty for the FBI to have all these concerns about Flynn, to know about Russian interference, and not pursue this matter once they knew Flynn lied. They knew the Russians knew Flynn lied. And Flynn is about to get briefed in the most sensitive information literally in the entire U.S. government as National Security Advisor. And we haven't even touched on the lobbying Flynn did for the Turkish government or reports that he was part of this insane scheme to literally kidnap a Turkish cleric named Fethullah Gulen from his home in Pennsylvania and take him back to Turkey where he would have been tortured or imprisoned or worse. So, that I think is the bigger picture of this effort by Barr that is purely political.
I mean, who thought that Flynn's lies mattered? Donald Trump and Mike Pence, because they fired him over them. And also, part of the problem here was they were running a counterintelligence investigation about Russian influence in the election. And the Russians knew that Flynn lied about the call. So Flynn was vulnerable to blackmail. The incoming national security advisor was vulnerable to blackmail because he told the public a lie that the Russians could prove was a lie because they knew that he had talked to Kislyak on the phone and what he had said. That is precisely why you do an investigation. And he pled guilty to it twice. Lovett, what are the potential implications of this going forward? Because Trump has basically spent all day on Sunday tweeting threats of revenge, accusing the Obama administration of conspiring against Flynn, including Hillary Clinton, John Kerry, and Barack Obama himself. He tweeted Obamagate many times now, and he actually retweeted a meme that said, "Hope you had fun investigating me. Now it's my turn."
This is a rollout of a conspiracy theory, and step one of the rollout of the conspiracy theory is getting everybody confused about what is ultimately a very simple thing. It's actually similar. I feel like we're doing this twice today, right? The White House is now having an outbreak of COVID, proving the necessity of testing that Trump is denying. All of this is pretty trivial. But, Mike Flynn is asked about his contacts with Russia in a Russia counterintelligence and criminal investigation. I'm sorry. Mike Flynn is asked about his contacts with Russia in a Russia counterintelligence investigation. He lies. He is caught for that lie. He pleads guilty. He admits to the crime. His very accomplished defense attorneys sign their names saying that this is all legitimate and that he is confessing and admitting to what he does. He is fired for his conduct. It is sort of sanctified up and down the chain of command. And then because Trump, heading into re-election, realizes he needs to drum up some kind of a story and some kind of assault on his own administration, gets Bill Barr to do all this, all for the specific purpose of being able to say the Russia investigation was actually a hoax and the real enemy here is Barack Obama. What they're doing now is first they muddy the water and get everybody confused about what happened. And then the next step is to say, actually, what really went wrong, the real scandal, is the Obama administration investigation of Donald Trump and Donald Trump's associates so that they can try to make this about Obama and Biden and some kind of abuse of power that took place during the transition and before because they view it as a way to help them win the election. And they're going to have a bunch of allies in the media help them do that. They're already doing this, right? The only people defending Flynn are the kind of serial liars and manipulators of the right wing. It forces you to ignore not just Flynn, not just Trump, not just Mike Pence, not just Flynn's own lawyers, but hundreds now, I think, 1,900, almost 2,000 career officials who are saying that this is an abuse of power. And, the media will likely go along with this argument that this is some kind of a right-left dispute when really it's a tiny cabal of right-wing Trump goons against tradition, nonpartisan experts, and everybody else.
Yeah, they always, like, one of the things that's most galling about the MAGA people and Trump in general is that they always claim to be victims of a government that they are in charge of and have been in charge of for a long time. That is true with, like, the right-wing protesters who are complaining about the lockdowns and saying this is government tyranny. Like, you're a bunch of Make America Great Again, QAnon-loving Trump fans. Don't you realize that he is in charge? And the other thing we should all be concerned about is this isn't the end of the revisionist history on the Russia probe, right? There's this Durham investigation that Barr has started. There's reviewing the entire...
Can you talk about what Durham... Like, this is John Durham. Just can you talk about what the Durham investigation is?
Yeah, I mean, he's going to review the entire Russia probe. And it seems like the goal is to find something they can point to which shows that former Obama administration officials politicized the investigation or did something improper or were trying to rig the election for Hillary Clinton and against Donald Trump, which is, things that Donald Trump has been asserting for literally years, right? But he's finally found his guy. He installed Barr at the Department of Justice, and Barr is more than happy to set up a process that he can point to as a fig leaf or sort of a sliver of justice that make it seem reasonable. But I think we should all be very worried about it.
Trump's also starting to bristle. He's also starting to bristle at FBI Director Christopher Wray, right? He's starting to go around to anyone. Forget holdovers from Obama. Just anyone who is not just a knee-jerk Trump defender, a true loyalist in positions of power inside of the Justice Department and inside of law enforcement.
I mean, Trump sort of like gave away the game over the weekend. He spent all day Sunday. He's still doing it today, tweeting, threats of revenge, accusing the Obama administration of conspiring against Flynn. He's, pointing out Hillary Clinton, John Kerry, Obama himself. He's tweeting Obamagate. He retweeted a meme that said, "Hope you had fun investigating me. Now it's my turn." I mean, that's what this is about, right? Like, if Donald Trump had pardoned Michael Flynn like he was planning to do, that would have been bad enough. But the purpose of having Barr dismiss the charges is not just letting Flynn off. It's saying the real villains here are the FBI and the DOJ and the Obama administration and law enforcement. They want to go after the Obama administration. I mean, I think there's two tracks here. The legal track, which involves, John Durham, this prosecutor that Barr has reviewing the whole case, is actually quite terrifying because I think, Trump is not going to be happy and Bill Barr is not going to be happy until they get someone or multiple people from the Obama administration and have some kind of a fucking show trial here. I think the political track, I don't know if it's going to be as effective for them because, like, watching Donald Trump start tweeting about something called Obamagate in the middle of a pandemic where over 80,000 Americans are dead, I do not think is going to find a lot of traction outside the fucking right-wing fever dream of like.
But that's the goal. That's the point, right?
That is the goal. Yeah.
If you, like, Dave Weigel did this interesting experiment where he downloaded like the Trump app and he downloaded the Biden app and he lived in the two different worlds they create for you in terms of media. And the Flynn story was the biggest thing that has ever happened in the world on the sort of MAGA app, right? If you turn into Fox News, this is what's going to pepper you. If you watch OANN, it's going to be all conspiracies. Like, he's clearly looking for something that makes him the victim again, that gets his people angry and motivated, that might distract them from his utterly terrible response to the pandemic. I don't know if that'll work, but it has certainly kicked up a shitload of media attention, and it's very, very purposeful. Otherwise, why do you send like 52 retweets or tweets in an hour on Mother's Day morning, right?
It's also just, I think, worth looking at how conspiracy theories have changed because of Donald Trump, right? You look at like 9/11 conspiracy theories, and it begins with a bunch of people in the fringe of the internet, making sort of spurious connections, and it ends up as, it's a joke on Twitter. Jet fuel doesn't melt steel beams, but you have sort of people building cases and building information so that they can develop up this conspiracy theory from the ground up to try to get it to catch on, to explain things in a way that's sort of false. Trump tweets Obamagate. There's no underlying fact pattern. There's no justification for it. There's no information to support that there is any kind of conspiracy going on. But he starts with the conspiracy at the highest possible level, and it's a signal to everyone from the legitimate slowly down to the nether regions of the kind of right-wing internet to begin building this argument so that it can bubble up into the mainstream press. And that's why this will be back again and again and again.
Yeah, I think there is diminishing marginal returns to the strategy of firing up your base, because I think from the beginning of this election, it is without a doubt the truth that, from the beginning of this election, it has been very, very clear that his base is going to turn out, and they're going to turn out in numbers like we've never seen, and they're going to be with him no matter what. And he's going to do all these things to juice turnout and to get his base excited. And exactly what you were talking about, Tommy, and what Weigel wrote about, by keeping them in this, information bubble the entire time. I wonder, what Donald Trump needs right now is, what worries me most about what he does in this election is, one, anything to get back sort of the suburban voters that he's lost in 2018, and two, whatever he can do to depress Democratic turnout, which that's their specialty. They did that in 2016 too. And I don't know if this fits with either of those strategies. I do have incredible concern about the sort of legal fallout, the fucking show trials, the fact that he's just making a mockery of our justice system and the rule of law. Like, that scares the shit out of me. But but I do wonder how this political move plays out in a world that's in a deep recession and a pandemic.
My other just sort of fear too is, one of the reasons he's starting to drum this up is because we may see more interference in this election. Yeah, and we're going to see more. We're going to see more interference potentially from Russia. Perhaps it's already ongoing, and we're going to find out fucking later. And as that unfolds, he's going to try to do this to muddy the water and make this about Obama and make this about anything other than the kind of illegitimacy of his previous victory and the illegitimate victory he's trying to eke out in 2020.
So one person who had something to say about all this was our old boss, Barack Obama. On Friday, Yahoo News obtained the recording of a call the former president did with around 3,000 former staffers, which somehow the three of us all missed. Towards the end of that call, didn't know it was happening. And towards the end of that call, 3,000 former staffers. We were not on there. And towards the end of the call, Obama said that Barr's dismissal of the Flynn case demonstrated that, quote, our basic understanding of the rule of law is at risk. And when you start moving in those directions, it can accelerate pretty quickly, as we've seen in other places. He also called Trump's response to the coronavirus pandemic, quote, an absolute chaotic disaster. Lovett, what'd you think? Were you at all surprised by how pointed Obama was?
I mean, okay, let's call that pointed. It's pointed from an
absolute chaotic disaster.
Is that
pulling punches?
I'm only saying that it's accurate. It's a completely accurate sentence, and it's used because Barack Obama is saying something obvious and accurate. It is a chaotic disaster. It's only pointed because the reality demands it. And that's it. That's what I got. I don't know what else. It's like, we're in this, I feel like, here we are, week 12, we're in our fucking week 30. I don't know. We're in our homes. It is an absolute chaotic disaster. It is good that Barack Obama's pointing it out. The New York Times could only muster saying that Barr's decision heightens fears of politicization at the Department of Justice. It's good that Barack Obama is willing to come out here and just point out how true this is, because it is still his megaphone. He still can reach people with it.
Well, I guess there was a lot of chatter after this was released, like, finally Obama's saying something. Why isn't he saying this in public? Why don't we hear him speak more? And, there's always various rounds of this every so often. It feels like people forgot 2018. A lot of times it feels like people forgot what happened in 2018 midterms. But, like, Barack Obama went out there and campaigned for Democratic candidates and talked about, like, how, democracy was at stake, the rule of law was at stake. Like, he said all this shit before. I do think there are people, some people believe that Barack Obama has these magical powers that when he comes out and speaks against Trump, suddenly like the Trump presidency will just crumble before our eyes, which is not really the case. I mean, I'm glad he said it. I'm always an advocate of Barack Obama speaking his mind more. Tommy, what do you think this tells us about like the role he intends to play in this campaign?
Well, I mean, look, I hope it's similar to the one he played in 2018 when he was out a lot, to the extent one can be out on the quote campaign trail these days. I mean, it does signal that he's not pulling punches. And I do think no one should be surprised by that. And the timing does seem appropriate by Obama's standards of sort of wanting to give Trump some leeway as an ex-president, but once you have a presumptive nominee, the campaign season has really started, and he put out that endorsement video, so I think you'll probably hear from him more regularly. Like, I'm sympathetic to the people who want to hear him out there more. He has a big megaphone, like he's able to get press attention and drive a message in ways that most other Democrats can't. This does seem to be, I think, a signal to them that you're going to hear a lot from Barack Obama going forward, especially in the fall. He's going to be campaigning for Joe Biden a lot, maybe from his living room, maybe on Zoom, but you're going to hear from him. And he will continue to be one of the people in the party that can really prosecute a case against the Republican Party better than almost anyone else. So it's a good thing.
I completely agree with that last point, too, because I think in his comments, there was what I think could be a really effective message for Democrats in November. He said, this election that's coming up on every level is so important because what we're going to be battling is not just a particular individual or a political party. What we're fighting against is these long-term trends. We're being selfish, being tribal, being divided, and seeing others as an enemy. That has become a stronger impulse in American life. And by the way, we're seeing that internationally as well. He said that the reason the response to the pandemic has been an absolute chaotic disaster is because that mindset of what's in it for me and to heck with everybody else has been operationalized in our government. And I do think in that, in those comments is sort of the seeds of a message that Democrats can, and Joe Biden and the rest of us can run on in November. So in the middle of his latest weekend Twitter meltdown, the president also falsely accused California Governor Gavin Newsom and other Democrats of rigging Tuesday's special congressional election in California's 25th district. He tweeted, quote, Governor Gavin Newsom of California won't let restaurants, beaches, and stores open, but he installs a voting booth system in a highly Democrat area, in parentheses, supposed to be mail-in ballots only. Now, suddenly Donald Trump, he loves mail-in ballots because our great candidate, Mike Garcia, is winning by a lot. CA 25, rigged election. Tommy, you want to unpack this crazy for us?
So there's a special election. Democratic State Assemblywoman Christy Smith is running against this guy, Mike Garcia. They're trying to fill out the seat left vacant by Congresswoman Katie Hill, who resigned from Congress. So this would be a special election that would allow that person to fill the seat until the November 2020 elections. The weird thing about this tweet, so the request to open this polling location in the area came from a Republican mayor, among others. The other option is vote by mail, which Trump also says is rigged. And so apparently he doesn't want anyone to be allowed to vote. That's sort of his position here. The other thing that's weird is that Republicans are winning that race, or so everyone seems to think. So he's drawing a whole bunch of attention to it, and he's calling it rigged when it seems likely that Mike Garcia is ahead. So this doesn't make any sense factually. It doesn't make any sense politically. I guess that shouldn't surprise me, but it was just like, I want to know what Fox segment he was watching that led him to pull this idiocy out of his ass, because normally that's the little breadcrumb trail we follow to figure these things out.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's two things. I think we're seeing he found a great way to combine two birds, one tweet. So there is evidence that Republicans are returning more of their mail-in ballots than Democrats. But there's a chance that Democrats could catch up in returning their ballots, or in some of these in-person locations. And by the way, it's not just one location. There are multiple locations, and this was opening one more location. And so this is about, I think, in a small way, previewing what could happen in November, which is a slow count over time, a Democrat slowly coming back and Trump delegitimizing the election. So that's just something to watch for. That's what he's testing.
So scary. It's going to happen.
Scary. So that's one. And then two, he just wants to take a shot at Gavin Newsom. In a week where they're having to send everybody home from the White House because of COVID, he wants to outsource the pain of protecting people from this virus. And so he's trying to blame Gavin Newsom for economic fallout in any way that they can. That's what Fox News is doing constantly. That's what Kevin McCarthy is doing. That's what all of these Republicans are doing. Why won't you open the House? I got a tea near the White House. They're trying to put anyone being responsible and listening to health experts as responsible for the economic cost.
Yeah, I mean, there would normally be 1,000 in-person polling places in this district. There's only going to be 13 because of COVID. And this polling place that Trump is talking about in Lancaster is one of them. It's heavily African-American community and didn't have a polling place like some other communities in the district. But like, as you pointed out, Tommy, Republican mayor, it's represented in the California state legislature by 2 Republicans. So it's not like the most Democrat area of California, as he said, or even in that district. But I do think, part of me was like, oh, I'm glad Donald Trump is calling attention to this race because Democrats need to get their fucking ballots in. We have a registration advantage in this district. Katie Hill won it by about 7 points in 2018, even though it was competitive. And there are more registered Democrats than Republicans, and everyone has been mailed a ballot. So
there's a ballot in your house. There's a ballot in your house.
If we lose this race tomorrow, the only thing we can blame is ourselves because Democrats did not turn the ballots in. They're at your fucking house.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, look, Dave Wasserman pointed out that Lancaster, which is the most heavily non-white area in CA 25, was in fact the only population center without an in-person voting center until this weekend. So if anything, this was righting an injustice. God help voters in states where you don't have a governor like Gavin Newsom who cares about democracy and doing the right things. This just speaks to the quiet voter suppression that happens in elections all the time, especially against people of color, and it's infuriating.
Yeah, and what everyone should know is, so we're behind right now. Obviously, Chrissy Smith, who was on the pod the other week, hopefully she can catch up as more ballots get returned and maybe some in-person voting on Election Day. But there's basically going to be a rematch in November because this is filling out the remainder of Katie Hill's term. And then they both have to, no matter who wins tomorrow, they both have to run against each other again in November. And so, Democrats believe that with a presidential election turnout, maybe Chrissy Smith could do even better in the November election. But still, a lot of people are going to be watching this race. There's going to be a lot of takes about what happens tomorrow. So go to votesaveamerica.com/CA25 to find out how you can donate or volunteer in these final 2 days. No matter where you live, you can help out. So call attention to that. There's also, by the way, going to be a special election. I think we talked about this before. In Wisconsin's 7th congressional district, Democrat Tricia Zunker is on the ballot. So you can find out more about that at votesaveamerica.com/Wisconsin. That's a little bit of a tougher race, but we just saw the Wisconsin Democrats pull out something big in that court race a couple weeks ago. So hopefully they can do the same. All right, when we come back, we'll have Tommy's interview with Patrick Radden Keefe, the host of our new podcast, Wind of Change.